Namaskar. I'm Rakesh Kaul. My family roots are from Ranawari and Karanagar in Srinagar, Kashmir. I'm a Kashmiri Pandit. We Kashmiri Pandits are the Jedi Knights of a grand civilization which has been the beacon of light for humanity, whose luminaries over the last 5,000 years have contributed so much that even today they fill one with wonder and joy. Today, we'll kick off a month long Kashmir festival, which will joyfully celebrate the Pratibha and Yogdan of our people. Each night, your guides will take you through a different facet of our Indra's net, where each diamond shines brighter than the next, even as we reflect each other's luminosity. It is my great pleasure to have a panel who are not just Jedi Knights, but are globally considered to be the Yodas of our community. Tonight, as our preceptors, we have Padma Shri Subhash Kakji, eminent Dr. Nirmal Matoo and distinguished scientist Dr. Shama. Now let us climb aboard the Kashmir time and spaceship because there is so much to travel. And let us begin with the beginning where Nilmata Purana says, the very land of Kashmira is the mother goddess Kashmira, Uma. Shamaji, let me start with you and then we'll go around. This beginning, this unique beginning, what do you think its implications were for the feminine, the fact that this land was called Stridesh, the fact that whereas in Europe, men would dress up as women, but in Kashmir, as Bharata says, in plays, women acted as men. This feminine supreme, what do you have to say about this unique facet of our civilization?
I know it's a good question, but I think a man should be able to answer it better. But I think Kashmir had their view of, not from beginning, or the Shiva. There was not trilogy, but came the Shakti, which was also an important part of Kashmir ethos. And I don't know where the dress came and what came, there are a lot of theories about it. But if you look at all over India, there was a different treatment of women. They're considered as the Devi, as the force, and which was something discovered much later. The whole evolution took place slowly, and that too took place in Kashmir. So it's very hard to say what was it. It probably was the whole thing. If you take 5,000-year-old history, it's very difficult to answer for me for this question, really.
So would you like, Subhashi, to posit what was the source that led to this unique aspect of who we
are? If you look at the geography of Kashmir, Kashmir was right in the center of what's been compared to a lotus with 4 branches. One is, of course, east, the whole of China. The other is Central Asia and beyond to Europe. And then south, of course, what in the Middle Ages was called Jambu Dweep, which is India. And in the north was Xinjiang and so on. So Kashmir, I think, acted as a place where a lot of ideas were fermented. And if you look at connections of India to other civilizations, we know about how Dhyan, for example, which is yoga, went from Kashmir to China and became Chan because they couldn't pronounce Dhyan. And from Chan, from China, it went to Japan and became Zen. And of course, we all know about all the great translators, Sanskrit scholars who also learned Chinese, and they translated these Sanskrit texts, like Kumarji, for example, everybody knows about him, and they placed a Kashmiri imprint because, for example, Kumarji's Lotus Sutra is still chanted in Buddhist monasteries and temples in China. And he didn't do a literal translation. He gave it a kind of a Vedantic imprint, which is why we find Chinese Mahayana to have a lot of connections with some of the central ideas which are a part of Vedanta in India. And of course, Kashmir Shaivism is also Vedanta with a certain twist. So I think not just the geography, but certainly the people who took advantage of this geography, who were open, and they still are. Um, Everybody knows that Kashmir's contribution to Sanskrit scholarship is absolutely immense, from linguistics to poetics to art, as in Vishnu Dharmottar Puran, to Ayurveda, and then philosophy, all kinds of subjects. You can go from one side to the other.
We'll get to them. We'll get to all of
Yes,
them.
yes. So amazing. All I can say is that I absolutely marvel at the contributions that Kashmir has made. We should be very proud. And I think this is a time to not only celebrate it, but once again, uh, become a creative force for the transformation of the world.
Yeah. So Nirmalji,
Can I take
picking,
a little
yeah,
uh, attempt at this? You see, this mother goddess complex is age old. It has been all over the world. And even the Shiva Shakti, the mother goddess is very important in all earlier civilizations. Even if this concept of male-female equality, and even in Chinese yin yang, when they painted, there is a black yin yang is there, and then the white dot is in one, and the black dot is in the other. So it just complementing each other. In India, in Kashmir particularly, because of this uh, thinking, the Shakti became a very important part of our intellectual development. And that's why the four temples that we belong to is either Ragna or Sharika or Zwala or Chesta. It's because of that concept, because we have mother goddesses there. And I think it's just continuation of a tradition that has been in the mind of human being for a very long time, in every religion, in every civilization.
and I think you guys brilliantly put your finger on it, that our ancestors saw Mother Goddess, saw nature as the source of creativity, as you have pointed out, Nirmalji, as you have pointed out, Subhashji, and they focused on this creative force, Shakti, and as you pointed out, Shamaji, this has been a defining feature of our civilization. So let me move on, and I'll start with you on the next one because I know this is a favorite saying of yours, Dr. Matoo. And this is this line from Kalhanna. He says, learning, lofty buildings, saffron, icy water, and grapes, things that even in heaven are hard to find or common in Kashmir. Nirmalji, what does this line say about us. I mean, it's like the good life, right? The good life of Kashmir. What were we celebrating here? Go ahead, you take this one first.
At every level, we see two things, nature and then nurture. Both play a part. Kashmir means it was a beautiful piece of geography. It's the biggest valley on this planet with water and high mountains. It was very attractive. But then the people chose certain things. Every civilization, every country, every family, every individual has same experience. Bumper crops, famines, wars, peacetime. They're virtually identical in any place. And then people choose in any community or in any family what is important for them. And I have to say that Kashmiris chose that being scholarly and pursuit of scholarship is very important. That was our nurture, and that was our idea of how the life should be. And it makes us what we are. And we are heirs to that legacy and that path that our ancestors put down, that we have to follow this path. So other thing that when they talk about Kashmir is that it is beautiful. There's no doubt about it. It's beautiful. It had a very thin population, so there was enough food to support people, even though later on we have had famines so often in Kashmir, but in early on, and that persistence and that perseverance in going for scholarship is the reason why we did uh, we developed all these great systems of Shaivite systems or Vaishnavite system of Buddhist thought. It was in Kashmir there where they were debated, they were refined, and then it went from there to the rest of the world, and it to, as Subhash said, to China. At one time, a Chinese king asked something like 5,000 Kashmiris to come there, monks to come there to translate all the Buddhist canon into Chinese language. So as Kumarajiva says, and so many of Kashmiri monks, they went all over and they taught there. Whether you go to Takshashila or you go to Sharda Peeth or you go to Nalanda, the abbots were mostly the Kashmiris there. This was because they had developed this concept that you have to become scholarly. So they went into everything, into philosophy, into literature, into aesthetics. And one of the greatest contributions of Kashmiris is to aesthetics. Sense of.
We'll come to that. We'll come to that, Nirmalji.
So that is part of your question. Why it's so beautiful? Why do we recognize?
Yeah, but I want to move to you, Subhashji, and ask you the same question, right? So Kashmir was a magnet civilization, and here is Kalana, basically brand positioning statement. And we have to look at it very carefully, right? He says learning, okay, so that's something that's attractive. Lofty buildings. Lofty buildings has a connotation that families live together happily, and we see many places where they talk about how high those buildings were. Saffron, clearly, when you look at the history of saffron, saffron was the Prozac of its time, and it was used for cosmetics, and the Buddhists used it for coloring their garments. Uh, I still haven't been able to understand what it is about the icy water, the glacial water, but grapes we know was a synonym for wine. Kashmir wines were clearly one of the best in the world.
And
So
they
this,
drink a lot also.
and they used to drink a lot. So what does this sentence mean to you about the way of life that Kashmiris sort of held up to the people around them and sort of said, "We have it and you don't"?
I think I get the import of your question. I think, first of all, before I address this question of what is it in Kashmiri life which makes it different, or what is it in Kanha's line which points to something very special, I just want to make sure that I don't forget to address this point about lofty buildings. If you look at Susan Huntington, who's one of premier scholars of art from the Indian subcontinent, she mentions very clearly that there were these skyscrapers in Kashmir, the Karkut times and later on. And a lot of these tall building ideas went from Kashmir elsewhere. And in fact, she even mentions that if you look at something innovative anywhere in East Asia, you must first check on Kashmiri architecture to see if it really came from there. So lofty buildings could have actually meant truly lofty buildings, that Kashmiris lived in tall buildings. I remember when I was growing up in Anantnag, there were buildings 8 or 10 stories high. There were some Kashmiri Pandit families who lived in tall buildings. But the other point about good life, I think that's a very important point, because Kashmir Shaivism and Kashmiri life in general, with its focus on aesthetics, on living well and being connected to nature, is not to run away from this world, but to participate in it, which is somewhat different from, let's say, the emphasis of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, which was really this Jagan Mithya, for example. This world is Mithya,
Yeah.
and only Brahma is eternal, right? So in Kashmir, I think we went back to the Vedic view. The Vedic view was, in the Vedic view, there were no ascetics who were not householders. In the Vedic view, the rishis were all householders. They were a part of the lived life. You don't have to run away from this world to find the mystery. And I think that's what Kalhan is talking about. And in that, Kashmir set a standard which is somewhat different, or focus which is somewhat different from what is valued elsewhere in India.
You see,
Brilliant.
I want to take this chance to add to it about the buildings. In Stein's book, he talks about Martin and says, build on the most sublime site occupied by any building in the world, far finer than the site of Parthenon, of the Taj, or of St. Peter's, or of the Escurial, that village in Spain or someplace. We may take it as a representative, or rather the culmination of all the rest, and by it judge the Kashmir people at their best. So beautifully written that the architecture here, what you're talking about, tall buildings and beautiful buildings and living, it represents what Kashmiri people are. It's part of that.
Thank you for sharing that. And so, Shamadi, you know, so many people miss this aspect about our culture, that we extol the good life. The Nilmut Purana, when you read it, it's basically a paean to the joyful people who literally every day were celebrating one festival after the next festival. What is your take on what Kalana tells us about our way of life?
I think we have this too much of a rosy life here. What we are talking about, it was not there all the time. There are suffering, there are diseases, there are everything. But when you come in the valley, it's such a beautiful place to come to. The first pleasure is looking at the valley and the peaceful people of valley, both men and women. And there are not strict rules to follow. Both women and men followed almost same kind of rules. So, it was nice to have. And remember, Kashmir Valley was surrounded by 5 trade routes. So people would come, people would go from Kashmir, and they affected each other quite a bit. the culture, the civilization, the trade. And one thing with the Kashmiris, they would not meet them. They would say, okay, you will meet a such and such place, like Chinese. We'll give you so much amount, you take it, but have the exact transaction. They would not go unless they went to Banaras, because most of these traders did come to Banaras, where Kashmiris would go there, pick up their thing and leave there. So the architecture and many things were influenced. But when it comes to, and that was Central Asia, that was all these countries like say, China and Japan and Mongolia, all these things uh, affected. They influenced each other. But when we come to I don't know how much totally it was when a visitor comes from parched lands outside or difficult places, they are going to look at Kashmir that way. Yes, they have been peaceful people, but when you see Nilmat Purana, I have not read much of, but a little bit of it. There was a lot of struggle for them to cultivate the land because the land was not available for country. It was a lot of work they put in to cultivate the land. Of course, many of them were they had come they were they knew how to they knew how to do that. They were literally agrarian people who want to settle down, think, meditate, and come out with nice philosophies, nice scholarly people. So they had to work a place, and they worked very hard, and they were intelligent basically. And one thing they always gripped the language, no matter what period of time it was, whether it was British, that's the first time they learned English. And then they came out to Delhi and worked as students and teachers. In Mughal time, they learned Persian. No Persian, nobody knew Persian that time. They became part of Darbar. And there they got in touch with other people also, with whom they communicated. So they have been always doing this. And many times coming out by force and going back and still trying to go. Even now,
So,
it's
so,
a,
so
such a
let
community that keeps going.
let's just stay with your point about language because that's so important. I don't want to leave it, Shamaji. And when we talk about language, obviously, Shamaji, Kashmir's great contribution was in Sanskrit. So learning in Sanskrit was synonymous. And Subhashi, do you want to just talk to us a little bit about what was that incredible contribution that Kashmir made to Sanskrit language?
You can get gleanings of it from so many different um, texts. For example, from Abhinav Gupta's life, because we have stories about how women and men would both attend his lectures or his pravachans or his talks. But then further back, and you have this whole literary tradition and tradition of drama. And before that, the, the, the Shaivite philosophy. Before that, I mentioned early on Vishnu Dharmotar Puran and this whole idea of aesthetics and art and architecture. And right in the beginning, the great commentary on Panini's Ashtadhyayi is Mahabhashya or Patanjali. Patanjali, according to some of the best scholars, was a Kashmirian, and Patanjali also made contributions to yoga, as we know. And yoga has been such a fundamental element of Indian thought. And then there was a Patanjali who also contributed to Ayurveda. Now, this is, of course, all very well known. What is still what needs to be investigated is the beginnings of Kashmiri language, because after the arrival of the Muslims, the Sanskrit scholarship went into decline. And then we have Kashmiri poets and writers and like Lal Diyad and so on. And a lot of scholars have worked on the recent centuries. But I think what needs to be done is also to see whether Gandhari, which was a language which was spoken in this region, say 2000 years ago, it's derived from Sanskrit, very close to Sanskrit, could have been a forerunner of Kashmiri. And if it was, then we know that Gandhari was, because of the influence of Kashmiris, it also was the language of Xinjiang, current day Xinjiang. So we have influenced much greater, that part of Kashmir. In fact, in one of my essays, I called it Kashmir's twin until 1006 when it fell to Islam. There was a lot of stuff going on. There was Sanskrit scholarship in Xinjiang. There was Gandhari, and of course, there is what is called Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit and Khotanese or Khotani language, which is also related to the other this languages and words. For example, the word Khuda that we know for God, from which the word God in German is derived, is Khuda in Persian, is originally from Sanskrit. And how do we know? Because the Khotanis used a word called swatau. Swa means one's self, tau means power. From swatau, it became kwatau. And from there, it went westwards and became Khuda. And then finally went to the German word, Germanic world, and became Gott, G-O-T-T, and then G-O-D in the English world. So there are lots of connections which still need to be discovered, and so much of what Kashmiris and Kashmir may have contributed to world scholarship and the world of ideas, because we do also know that Vedic ideas or Sanskrit ideas went through the Slavic world up northwestwards. And for example, in the Slavic world, the chief god was called Shvetavid, or the knower of light. And there were four faces to it. One face was called Moksha, another face was called Swarga, another face was called Parjanya, and a fourth face was called, I forget. So all of these Sanskrit words, I personally believe, and of course it's very speculative, that these were just as there were scholars going eastwards, through China, which is very well documented. There were probably scholars from Kashmir going eastwards, and they have left a permanent imprint for which much needs to be further researched.
Yeah,
Nirmal,
Rakesh, I just add a couple of things to it. Kashmir stands separate than rest of the India. Rajtarini was written in Sanskrit. All our writers were writing till 14th, 13th century in Sanskrit. Means the audience was there to read Sanskrit. We were speaking Sanskrit. When you see Ashoka's, whatever he erected, everything is in Pali and one of the Prakrit languages. Whereas in Kashmir, for 1,000 years after that, 1,200 years after that, we were still speaking Sanskrit. That had to do with the scholarship, because the men and women both were educated and both knew the language very well. Kashmiri language developed a little later, but this use of Sanskrit in all of Bilana, the poet who went to south, wrote in Sanskrit. Kalidas, who most of the people think is a Kashmiri, wrote everything in Sanskrit. And our own writers, you take Abhinavgupta, any of these people, they wrote in Sanskrit language. So Sanskrit was a language they thought was important to them. And when Islam came to India and outside people came, and that they were forcefully made to leave this language. So Kashmir stands out something totally different, where Sanskrit language flourished for a long time after it was basically gone from most of the people. It was still the lingua franca of Kashmir for a very long time.
let me put, first, Subhash, thank you for sharing some very provocative thesis about Gandhari language. Nirmalji, you articulated beautifully uh, the longevity and usage of Sanskrit literally up to the 13th, 14th century. But let me push this language issue. Because, yes, Sanskrit, Kashmir was a center of Sanskritic culture. But are you not intrigued that when the Kashmiris decided that they had to learn Persian to survive, they learned Persian better than the Persians? If they had to learn Urdu, they learned it better than the native Urdu speakers. And best of all, when somebody decided that he was going to learn English better than the English, he made it happen. And I want you to share it for the global audience, Nirmalji, a little bit about who this man was.
No, I'm not going to be too coy about it, but gold produces gold. If you have scholars who are trained well, who have thousands of years of history of scholarship, and they have to change to something else, they do it very well, because to start with, the matter was the people were educated. They could learn very easily. And they I- let me make one thing clear. I don't believe anybody is more intelligent than other, any community or any nation or anyone. It's the choices a community or a nation makes what is more important for them. And because of this concept of scholarship being most important, uh, they do well in these in scholarly activities. Sure, the name Shah in Kashmiris was because one Kashmiri Pandit went to one Mughal court and he recited some Persian poetry, and he was very good looking, was dressed in very well. So the king said, not only your Persian is so good, but you look like a king, look like a Shah. And from that Shah family name came. No, we have excelled in that. I was reading, I'm not only maybe a few months back, that Ghalib's mother was a Kashmiri. I didn't know that. Uh, so maybe he learned his good Urdu and Persian poetry through his mother. So
Do you want to just take a minute and talk about Professor Braj Kachu? Because I think our global audience might find that a fascinating contemporary case history about the point about how much the Kashmiri culture, Kashmiri Pandit culture, valued mastery over language.
you take even in Urdu, you take PSC call or you take check bus, all these unbelievable Urdu right. About, I met him so many times, Braj Kachru was a very dear person to me. Uh, at a very young age, he went to England and then eventually he brought this Indian English. They call it Hinglish English. That is the name of that. And he showed it to the world that there are many different Englishes all over the world, and they're all legitimate. They have their own syntax, their own expression, their own nuances, everything, but they're all legitimate. And he actually went and established Kashmiri language course in University of Urbana in, in Illinois. And he, he's taken as world's authority, unfortunately passed away, but world's authority on English language. So yes, we have spread a lot all over.
Thank you for sharing that. Shamaji, one of the very peculiar consequences of the mastery that Kashmiri Pandits had over multiple languages is, and doesn't get much attention in our community or the world, is that we were master spies. on the northwest frontier for thousands of years, the Kashmiri Pandits turned out to be the spies. In fact, in my book, there is no greater spy than Mohanlal Kashmiri. And when you read a story, you say, how could this man, was he for real? He was, I think, the first Kashmiri Pandit who went to England. He was entertained by the Queen's husband,
He was
entertained by
very
the
good looking also.
well, I don't want to talk about how many wives
You
he
need
had.
to be, I think you need to be good looking for that.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
what is your take? Do you have a perspective on this command of language, which over 5,000 years, starting with Sanskrit, going all the way to English, what does it say about us?
Okay, genetically, I don't know if it has been analyzed, but Kashmiris have been found to be very good in languages and artists. They're artists, basically. The language, theater, music, they have a basic tendency for these. And this is misnomer that I asked Mr. Kashru, P.N. Kashru, a great artist. I don't know, some of you know I told him about Sanskrit. I said, what happened to Sharda language? Why don't we have, what happened to Sanskrit language? He said, what is Sharda? Sharda is a script of Sanskrit language. Pali is a script of Sanskrit language. Now we're not talking, it's a script. Don't call it language. So one thing he said, correct me yourself, it is a script. And Sanskrit language came as a script for Brahmi, and it came rudimentary, then became Brahmi, that was an Ashoka style, then Pali when we went to certain Ardhamagri when we went to Bihar, Odisha, not Odisha has some Telugu in it, Bengal, Assam, Ardhamagri. Then Jains have Ardhamagri. But when the typewriter was discovered, invented, then the Sanskrit was easy to be put on the typewriter. So not Sanskrit, the the Devanagari. So to call these languages, these scripts as languages, that's not right, because it was Sanskrit came in different batches. It was came Parthi, Shardi. He gave me four names. I don't remember the other two. And these are all Sanskrit languages, Sanskrit languages. But scripts are different. So to say script is different. But if you look at Sharda, some of the people I know who are learning Sharda, they said it's just like Sanskrit. Only thing is the Sharda script. Pali got certain changes in it. When you take the Buddhist scripts, it gets Ardhamagri got certain changes, but you can understand quite a bit of it. Brahmi was difficult because it's really rudimentary, not the most first rudimentary language, it came rudimentary. So, because when you travel, first of all, you have that tendency to become a little dramatic. So you can become a good spy, and you have to do the trade back and forth. So you have to have different personality, and you have the zest to learn the language of any place where you can communicate. And Kashmiris had a lot of unfortunate chances for that, unfortunate chances too, to communicate. So they developed that art. They developed that art beautifully of the language learning, and that helped them drama, theatrics, everything, and all the different skills.
So the first place, Subhash,
So this is an
fir-
Rakesh, I'll tell
uh,
you a very interesting story that
yeah,
I'm just telling story. There was this gentleman, Agyanand Bharti. He
mm,
eventually became professor at University of Syracuse University, a Indophile, and he lived in India. And he once wrote in his book that I walked north to south and east to west 40 years. I never missed a meal. Somebody gave me a meal. Anyway, during the war, he was caught by British. They thought he was a German spy. I'm thinking. He told them, no, he wasn't German. He was a Kashmiri because he was fluent in the language. And they let him go. And he writes in his book, he has passed away, but I talked to him when Premnath Bazad had come. He was staying with us. And he asked me to go through his manuscript. So he had sent it to him also. I talked to him. But it's very interesting, this spy thing, but it's the other way around. a white guy, Germanic guy saying I'm a Kashmiri was able to fool British and get out.
So that's a great story. I, I wouldn't be surprised if other people have used the same excuse. Subhash, the first application of language in Kashmir was poetics. In fact, going back to Kalhana's statement, Bilhana makes a very interesting statement. He says, uh, saffron and poetics are twin brothers. And what do you think? What was it that resulted in such domination of kavya as a genre in Kashmir? When you look at classical kavya, what was it that led to people like Kalidasa and all the great poets who followed him?
Well, I don't really know. I think, of course, Professor Kalla suggested, he was a professor of Sanskrit in Delhi University, that Kalidas was Kashmiri on
Yeah.
various evidence from his plays, but not everybody is agreed on that. And uh, perhaps the way I can answer it is to connect it to one of the questions that you had asked earlier on. What was it about the place which made Kashmir produce so much of outstanding stuff? And Nirmal ji also spoke of how maybe people all over the world are the same, but there are some cultures which are able to stand out. And I think that was the emphasis in Kashmir, and probably still is, on excellence. You have to be devoted to excellence. Your culture has to focus on excellence when you're bringing up children, and then push them towards it. And there is a word in Sanskrit which communicates excellence, and that's called shishta. A shishta is one who's devoted to excellence. But sadly, over the past couple of 100 years, we haven't praised people who were shishtas, because in Kashmiri, a word of derision is called shitabatta. Shitabatta is a shishtabatta. So people who were devoted to excellence were ridiculed and laughed at. Maybe that is the reason why in more recent times we haven't done as well as earlier on. And I think that is something that we need to bring back, a devotion to excellence.
About this Kalidasa, when you read Raghuvamsha or Ritu Samvara or even Meghdutta, his reference to the mountains and his reference to how we go, and then his reference to how saffron flower from beginning to end it grows there, how it's taken care of. It's not only Kalla, I read his thing, the Kale from Maharashtra, who has translated Kalidasa. His book also, he gives 3 different theories in that. And Tagore wrote a big treatise on that and said he's from Kashmir. Because one was the language, Sanskrit, he was writing in Sanskrit, where most of the people where he was writing in the area were not Sanskrit speaking. And second thing is his so close understanding of Kashmiri things. Other thing on the language, I know the scripts are Kev Brahmi, Ashoka Brahmi, Sharda, and Devanagari. They are scripts, but I have read Pali. I sometimes read the Buddhist books. They are very close to Sanskrit language, but it's a different language. We used to call them Apsabrahmas, the impure languages. And all these languages are Apsabrahma or Apbrahmas languages. And they are languages. They are not scripts. All scripts in India are based on Ashoka Brahmi, Tamilian or Telugu or any script. They're all same descent, including the Thai script and I think Cambodian also. now, but the languages are different.
I want to come back to Subhashji, and then I will certainly give you ample time, Shamaji. And I'm seeking some discussion. When you look at poetry, dominance, when you look at Itihasa, which Kashmir certainly with the Ratarani series was quite unique with its own sense of history. And most importantly, when you look at storytelling, whether it's Panchtantra or Katha Sarat Sagar, is there something that they had stumbled on? And I'm going to ask that question in two parts. Number one, modern research seems to suggest that the act of memory stimulates the same part of the brain that the act of imagination does. So, did this composite learning and expertise in language and itihasa in literature, on one hand, it was a repository of your wisdom, of your knowledge, but on the other hand, it also was the repository of your imagination and creativity. So that's question number one, Subhashi, for you. And then also question number two is this. I'm always struck by what the late Pandit Gopi Krishna, when he was asked the question, what are the signs of a person who has experienced enlightenment? And he sort of shared that in very defined biological markers. But one of the markers, he said, of spiritual realization is that your walk, your speech, breaks out spontaneously into poetry, not prose, into poetry. With those two questions, just want to get a little bit of a deeper understanding of the mechanisms inside us that were operating these core competencies of language, literature, history, poetry, storytelling.
Well, I'll just make two points related to the very vast question that you have asked. First, in my view, what sets Kashmiri sensibility apart, if it is certainly apart from, let's say, rest of North India, North Indian literary sensibility, is its simplicity of form. It's its clean lines, as in its architecture. And likewise, in my as a poet myself, I personally emphasize or value straightness, directness, much more than on cleverness. In fact, my own take is that a lot of Sanskrit poetry started valuing cleverness too much, and that's why it became formulaic at a certain point. Now, when you go back to Anandavardhan and Abhinav Gupta and the whole idea of aesthetics, the point of view that they stressed was the point of dhvani, that ultimately it's not cleverness that's most important. What's important is whether your artistic creation is able to communicate the transcendent, the para, to the audience or to the spectator. And I think it was the fact that people were quite consciously aware of all of these things, and also the fact that um, in opposition to what was the general thing in rest of India, Kashmiris emphasize this world also, ihalok, also not just the parlok, not just uh, you know mukti or moksha, that this world itself, experience in this world itself, can bring you happiness and insight, which is like moksha, which is the point that came up earlier on, that the rishis in Kashmir were a part of the lived life. They were householders. They didn't say that you got to give it up and go to the forests, that you could live it like everybody else, because this world is also a manifestation of Shiva or Vishnu or Shakti, this world itself. So this world is not mithya. So I think there are all of these threads which came together in a beautiful way, and which is the reason why where rest of India didn't do as well was in straightforward narration of life, of kings, of people. While you mentioned Katha Sarit Sagar, for example, one of the greatest books of storytelling all over the world, from where a lot of copying, of which a lot of copying was done all over the world. Or Yoga Vasishta, another great text,
Yeah,
one of the greatest texts ever written in any world literature. So all of these things came in Kashmir because there was this wonderful marriage, so to speak, of this life and aspiration to a higher life, and to do this marriage through beauty, through through cultivating sensibility of one's senses and understanding. So I think in that sense, Kashmir has done amazing. And let's also not forget two things that didn't come up. One was, of course, Bharat, Natya Shastra, which is supposed to be the fifth Veda. And most scholars believe that Bharat was from Kashmir. And Sharang Deva's Sangeet Ratnakar, which is the foundation of North Indian
Yes.
classical music. Later on, while Bharat's music itself is the beginning of Indian classical music. And also Pahadi paintings, Chan Suk, for example. All these Kashmiris, after they were turned out or pushed out, they went to Jammu and Basoli and then to Kangra and to Himachal and created a great style of painting. You go back and you see and marvel at what they did. And these were Kashmiris. So amazing stuff.
And
so Shamaji,
about the
uh,
poetics,
yeah,
in the aesthetic system, Bharata definitely was a Kashmiri, because all the people who eventually developed the schools were all Kashmiri. Vamana's Riti school, Bhama's Alankara school, Anandvardhana's Dhani, Auchutya, Kuntaka's Vakroti. So I'm going to come to Vakroti. In that school, it is the play of words, not straight. They are different than how you write or what you're saying you write, which others write. He said that is very important, because Kuntaka says this poem is sound and the movement of the sound. So if you manipulate it a little bit, that is the life of it, jivan of it. Not the others don't say. Then when they use alamkara, they try to play around with straightness of it. And all these people who started these schools were Kashmiris, all of them. But we have a poetry in Kalata and Balata, and they set the parameters of poetry much before Bellana. Bellana did much later. He went to South and he had that affair with the king's daughter, and that story is a famous story. But we had Kashmiris talking about right from the time of what's his name, the one who wrote Natya Shastra.
Bharata.
From that time onward, because they laid what is rasa? How do you get rasa out of a poem? How it should be written, right? And what should the person experience? What are sthai babas, what are vyabhichari babas, what are anubhabas? They just describe them all, how it should function. So poetry in Kashmir is infinitely old. And these people say we refer to things from the past, even though we put a date at that date, right? Like, interesting thing is the historian Kalana says, I read 19 histories that were written before me, and I have gotten from that. We don't have even one of them right now. And makes a statement right in the beginning. I am writing not like other people who write great things about their kings. I am writing what is happening, exactly the way it is happening. As a true historian, he put the parameters in first 15 pages, how he's writing the book. So there was tremendous intellectual fervor there. And that's what it is about. It's not that there is anybody has bigger brain. It is the environment. It is what was thought to be the great. You know, in Europe, it was the who is the best swordsman. He used to be the closest to the king. That's what it was. He got the best house. He got the best woman. He got the best place to live at. And so it's a question of what a community or a family or an individual thinks what is most important for him. That's what. All over India, we have caste system, which I'm upset with. But they made Brahmins the highest. They didn't have money. He'd go in the morning to beg for alms. But the king will bow to him. His minister used to be a Brahmin because he was intellectual. Vidwan tha wo. And you go to a farmer, he gets some money in India, poor farmer. First thing he says, "Bachche ko vidwan, bachche ko padhana." So that is part of our. In Kashmir, it was more emphasized. That's all it is.
These are, as you said, Nirmalji, choices that cultures make, and a conversation like this helps crystallize for the next generation what were the choices that really worked. But I can see, you know, uh, last 15 minutes, everybody wants to get into the subject of beauty. So Shamaji, uh, uh, Manto famously said, to be Kashmiri is to be beautiful. And Professor Sheldon Pollock said, if there was one contribution that India has made, just one that would put it right at the top, it's the theory of aesthetics, which, as we know, was centered in Kashmir. So, Shamaji, why don't you start by sharing? You traveled a lot in India, you traveled a lot around the world. What are you struck by when you look at the Kashmiri sense of beauty, the Kashmiri sense of aesthetics, and it's such a vast subject. We'll go around the panel.
I know it's very strange. When you say beauty, I don't know what beauty you're talking about because I don't look at faces at all. I just see what our beautiful tendencies are and where they come from. When
Okay.
I see Kashmiris, I see them innocent in
Mhm.
certain ways, and I also see them little, spy type of people. So there is something very thoughtful people, very contemplative people,
Mhm.
very contemplative people. People sometimes they get drowned in own contemplation, and that they're beautiful poets. They're beautiful uh, cooks. They love food. They love nature. They have brought up in nature, and they were 6 months or 7 months of the winter. They were housebound. They could not do anything. So a lot of time to think about, lot of things to write about it. Since they were in touch with outside world, they would go, sort of as monks, as Brahmins, at murtakas, or artists. They learned a lot. They sent a lot of material back. So there was amalgamation of many thoughts into Kashmir, and from Kashmir quite a bit. But about a time, and their mindset is very contemplative, very artistic, very artistic. And that's, I feel sometimes, that's why I draw to them the feminine Shakti, because it is artistic. It takes care of the art and aesthetics of in the nature. And it's a real. It's not every brain, every mind is not developed for that. Some people, whether circumstances or their own tendencies, develop in that. Warriors develop the war like Kshatriyas. They are warriors. They are, and these are contemplative people. They're good at contemplation, good at drama, good at everything, and that needs to be recognized. What is good in it? What we can do? How we can teach ourselves and others? What we can learn from others? When we travel, I really felt there's a lot to learn. Lot to learn. Not only what we are good at it, at what we are not good at to live in this world, because we cannot be in Kashmir all the time. We never have been in the Kashmir all the time. That's the sad part of it. But we took always a little bit of Kashmir with us wherever we go. And wherever we go, that little bit we should carry with us wherever we are and flourish with it. And one thing was that really struck me. There are so many things that struck me while I was traveling in Karnataka. And Karnataka, I feel, is very philosophically bent of mind. Many people, they have developed beautiful Sanskrit languages, Sanskrit institutions they had even now, and a lot of culture of India. Many of them have come to India, and some Kashmiris have also gone there in modern times. Learning process when I went to Matoo, the Sanskrit village. I did not know there was people who still speak Sanskrit. I asked a Sanskrit guru here. I said, I have seen in British census, there are 400 Sanskrit people who speak Sanskrit, who their mother tongue is Sanskrit. What does that mean? He said, they speak Sanskrit like you speak Kashmiri is their mother tongue, Punjab's mother tongue. I'm from Karnataka, so this is their mother tongue. I said, are they still alive? Because the census was sometime in 1922, 20, sometime by British. He said, yeah, they are still there. I said, really? Can I go and see them? Then he arranged a trip in 2014. After 8 years of my talking to him, he said, you can go there. The first thing, the person there I met, he said, where are you from? Then the person who was with me, I didn't want to say where. I said, now they start discussion on Kashmir. He said, she's from Kashmir. And he discussed so much. And he said, why don't you people come out? We want to learn from you. And a lot of things are going on here. We want to learn. You can learn from us. There's so much. We feel isolated from Kashmir. Kashmir has so much to give, and we have to give so much to Kashmir also. I said that may be the, that. From there, I went to Sringeri. I think you know it. About when I went to Sringeri, it was a beautiful trip. And there I told my companion who was helping me, I said, please don't, because I get in discussions, I don't get time to see these places. There, Matadish, I don't remember his name now, kind of very interesting. He was Matadish for a long time. Then when he found I'm from Kashmir, we started discussing about Abhinav. We started discussing Sharda. And he told me, you know something, what my wish is? I said, no, don't tell me. He said, do you see the architecture of Sharda, that temple? I said, yes, it is. Sringeri temple is, I don't know if anyone have gone. It was a unique architecture. It looks like a boat, but very beautifully. And when I asked main priest, I said, where is Sharda's Murti, the wooden Murti? He said, we're not going to show you. It has come here. It's wrapped somewhere, but it's a wooden thing. So it is put in silver. I said, it was a beautiful trip, meeting all. And there also, I asked Matadish, what is your wish? He said, I wish somebody would get us here a big Sharda Peeth temple, some picture of that, so that we can put in the 4 squares. There's a big place there. We can put it there, a huge picture of that. We may not get it here, so that people can see where original Sharda Peeth temple was. This was such a beautiful, that interaction. I said, we all need to interact. We all need to know what went outside around same period of time, what we got from there and what we gave in that direction.
Yeah.
There are
So
a lot of
so
interaction.
Rakesh, you can talk about this relationship with Sharda Peeth. We have.
yeah. So Nirmalji, picking up on that incredible example of Sringeri, the reality is, out of all of the things that Shankaracharya did in Kashmir, the one thing that he was mesmerized by was what he called the dancing earrings on the Kashmiri.
Dejor.
Yeah, de jure. So, Nirmalji, picking up on the fact that at the end of the day, even Shankaracharya was struck by the beauty of the de jure, what is your take on Kashmiri sense of beauty, aesthetics? Why did it become something that now all around the world people are studying that framework. Your take on that?
It is
My
a
take is
No,
Kashmiris
no,
are
no,
very
no, Nirmal.
poetic people.
Yeah, yeah. Now let's give Nirmal the chance. Yeah,
it is a
yeah,
They are
Caucasian.
poetic people. They are aware of their divinity. They're aware of their divinity. At the same time, they are aware of their beauty. Wherever they can combine these two things, and they're artists. I mean, look at our women are also artists. They have done great work. They have not come on the forefront. The poetry, the artist, is just amazing. They have not been able to come out. So our men have not been able to come out either after some time. But I think that sense is there, beautiful sense. And they
yeah.
will
You know,
look
And
after
it is,
Nirmal,
themselves very well.
yeah, and Nirmal, Shamaji,
there is
let's
a
give Nirmal.
there is a Caucasian sense of beauty.
Yeah,
Herodotus in 6th century BC wrote, if dogs were asked to paint the most beautiful god they can think, they'll paint him like a dog. So it is something how we see beauty, how we have been trained to see beauty. Beauty, when we talk philosophically, we can say it's inner beauty. You're talking about physical beauty, right? It that is what we define. What is the going thing? Kardashian has 200-pound hips. That's supposed to be something great. And then there are other beauties who are like slim and everything. Eventually, beauty comes out of a person as a whole, how they look, how they talk, what they have done, all those things. That represents beauty personally to me. It's more than just physical thing. Physical beauty is defined by people in the area they live. If you have never seen a black person, you won't even know what is beauty. If a black person has never seen a white, he won't even know what is white beauty. So Mongols have a different sense of beauty, what is beautiful for them. So that changes, that differs. Only one more thing I think, which couple of things we are missing in this whole discussion is the amount of contribution Kashmiris have done in art. I have been to thousands of these kind of meetings, but people miss that. In every different facet of art, I'm not talking about aesthetics. This is the technical thing. Because how a Vishnu should look like, what should be, should have. Bhudevi in the middle, it should have chakra, Gada chakra on one side. Those things are all defined. It's the artist who knows what the material is, how he uses the material, how he carves it, how he does it. He didn't change the parameter, even though they used to take liberty. We have Durga on a chariot, Lakshmi on a chariot, big carved Kashmiri statue where they had taken liberty. Kashmiris also created art which was narrative. When Shiva gets married, he goes to a dice game and he loses Nandi in the dice game. Now the people are taking Nandi, it's carved so beautifully in two different panels on the same stone sculpture. Beautifully done. They show now picking up that mountain high up. And how they divided the whole thing into a large, showing the strength of Rama. Even though other people who are gods are shown small because they want to show his strength. It's a very narrative way of, in a stone sculpture, to do that. And as Subhash said, it's Manaku and Rasraj and all these miniature artists, they were all Kashmiris. In Mughal, the Kashmiri Pandits, they have been Muslims also, but Kashmiri Pandits. We have unbelievable. I went to Cleveland and I saw Cleveland Buddha. And you saw that when we had Art of Kashmir exhibition here, right? The Pratapaditya Paul was able to get it. When I saw that, I thought I have seen the ultimate. The proportions, the iconography, the facial things and proportions in a brass thing, you know. You pour in it, if it doesn't go to that place, there's a big hole, you don't get it. Such an art to do that. We have, we are missing that part. And there are some unbelievable pieces of art. Priyarchi Buddha. There is a Saraswati that was with the royal family of Gilgit. I saw it on auction here one time, but the prices went in millions. So, you know, there's some beautiful, beautiful art. And you have Indrakshi that was brought in here from Pratap Singh Museum. There's some unbelievable pieces of art all over. And another thing is that even in this rasa, which we're trying to enjoy today, this whole discussion, that introduction of Shanta rasa, you know, that's so important that Kashmiris did. With Abhinavgupta, even though I think Udbata was the first one to talk about it. And we had Shantara, we had statues of Buddha inward looking, so peaceful and everything we had. But to say that this is the ultimate rasa from where everything comes, everything goes back into that contribution of Kashmir is many years after the original 8 rasas were formulated. So there is so much there in Kashmir, in literature, in art, theater, in music, in whole Indian music, as Subhash said, Sharang Bhagata is writing from north till south, both places. Karnataka music or Hindustani music are dependent on that. Rakesh ji.
Subhash, so we have Shamaji saying we are an artistic people, and Nirmalji expanded that to say it's not just that we are artistic, that our artistry reflected an extraordinary level of technical excellence. You talked about technical excellence before, Subhashji, and he also posited this idea of Shantrasa, where beauty was not art and artistry was not only about aesthetic pleasure, but as was seen elsewhere, but aesthetic pleasure that could lead to Shantras, the highest state. So there was the promise of the highest state. What is your perspective on it? And in the interest of time, I want to move now a little bit quicker through the remaining topics, but I do want to get your take on it.
Well, I do. Yeah, I sort of agree that it was this coming together, the harmonization that happened in Kashmir, which contributed to these wonderful insights. Because ultimately, it's nature. If you can connect to nature, you learn from nature. Ultimately, it's Prakriti as Shakti, which provides us the deepest insights. And I think perhaps the physical beauty of Kashmir, of nature, of the rivers and streams and mountains, and also the tradition and focus on excellence made it all possible.
There were some in art, for example, there are some spatial things that are only Kashmiri. You see, showing Vishnu with a Vara Avatara and Narsimha Avatara on two sides, showing Vishnu with Bhu Devi between his feet, Gada, Gada, Gada Nara and Chakra Nara on two sides. This is a Kashmiri creation. In Kashmiri, sometimes they'll put a necklace that goes to their knees. It was only for Balarama in rest of the India, but we use it. There's a trefoil crown on all statues that Kashmiris use.
Trefoil.
There are particular things, and even in our architecture. Architecture, there is a trefoil arch. Every temple. You take the oldest Lado temple, or you take Shankaracharya, or any temple you take. Then there is two things that thing goes twice, and in between is a where all the gods and goddesses are shown. It's same structure, and then you have peristyle where you have lot of like in Matand or in Avanti Pura and Avantisar temple, and you will see that all different statues. Yeah. So they had developed their own style also. In the initial, many of the things you see Gandhara impact. You know, the Gandhara with very, very sharp nose, the eyes and the hair, whichever way. You see the Gandhara element, and the drapes are very sharp. But then see, they went back to the Indian and Gupta at that time when the drapes became very thin. You can see through them. The ears became long. Right? Shanti Rasa came in. They were inward looking. Most smile, you can see through the smile. Clothes, you can see through the clothes. So they changed also from time to time and developed their own style of art. They gave up parts of, there are a lot of them, Gandhara influences, some have Mathura influences, but they developed their own style. It was beautiful. I mean, say, I can talk for months, you know.
But let's pick up on your operating phrase that the art evolved where now the gaze was turned inward. And what a magnificent journey in Kashmir that turned, turned out to be. Subhashi, take us into the incredible contribution of Kashmir in yoga, in Tantra, and that question which today now is become a burning question, which is the subject of consciousness. And what have Kashmir's contributions been in that whole field of understanding the true nature of reality?
Well, Vedanta in general, and of course, Kashmir Shaivism is a certain kind of Vedanta. The fundamental foundation of reality is consciousness, because after all, we perceive the physical world in our consciousness, in our individual consciousness. And Indians and certainly Kashmiris have always been aware of it. And Kashmir Shaivism is an exposition of it. Shiva is consciousness as an entity, and therefore, and all of Yoga Vasishta, for example, is a text, and all the other tantra texts. Kashmir Shaivism itself is a tantric approach, where tantra represents the architecture of the mind, of consciousness. So, and not just that, you also have Sri Vidya, for example. It's a very popular tradition in South India, and most scholars believe that it emerged in Kashmir, and from Kashmir it went elsewhere. So, a lot of stuff where the deepest questions were asked, and these questions ultimately go to the very nature of what consciousness is, and how do we relate both Shiva and Shakti and Vishnu and all other deities in this castle of the mind, so to speak, where through the senses and through our mind we are able to paradoxically lift ourselves up, literally, by like lifting ourselves through our bootstraps, through the ball. We lift ourselves up and then become one with the transcendent. So I think the contribution that Kashmiris have made are amazing, and we see a continuation of that in Lal Ded, for example, and other mystical poetry, because Lal Ded was talking very directly of the technical ideas of Kashmir Shaivism. And in all our customs and festivals, all the whole cycle that you mentioned, all those festivals were a introduction to the deeper thing, because as younger people, as people of lesser experience, we relate to the outer story. And once we have understood the outer story, then we are able to go to the very heart of the deeper felt experience. So I think there is a whole complete system where the festivals should not be derided, that hey, it's not just the it's festivals is we just hold on to philosophy and poetry. No, it is all integrated. And perhaps because it was integrated, that's how so many people from a population base which wasn't all that large, certainly not a few centuries ago, was able to do so much.
Thank you. And Shamaji, so we come back to where you started from, that our pathway to the ultimate reality that Subhash talked about, Vedanta, is through Shakti. What is your own observation on Kashmir Shaivism and uh, that body of knowledge, those practices? What have you to say about it?
Well, I feel in Kashmir, uh, we didn't have Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva. We had only Shiva. Shiva was one of the gods. You can say it was more like one monotheism. We had one Shiva. Then we're also aware of the Shakti from the beginning. I told you the contemplative people know there's something more than that. There's more than just a Shiva that sits there, contemplates there. But they were also aware of, because being sensitive people were always aware of, any sensitive person will be aware of the, the energy part of it. They may not discriminate between the two, but always aware of that. And that's why we put everything in Devi. Shiva was not to give us for worship, but Devi was our mother. Devi was our mother. And whether we did tantric way or aradhana or bhakti way, we did, she was our mother. So we are aware of that. We're aware of the divinity of this element from the beginning. There was not so much discussion on this as much outside Kashmir. There was always discussion: should we have a Ram, or should we have Vaishnavite, or what is the other? What is the other way? Shavite, Vaishnava. There was fight. There was no fight. Shiva was there, our God or our Lord, but Devi was our protector all the time. So Devi was very powerful figure in Kashmir, and there was not the Devi for money, Devi for giving us this, Devi giving for this was Devi. There were Bhairavis, yes, Bhairav and Bhairavis, which the Bhairav is also Shiva, and so this was it took a different form, but they were protectors, taking care of her. But we're always aware of divinity there. And as far as Shaivism is concerned, I think this is the most beautiful thing. Kashmir Shaivism, I felt this was one of the best ways of any other Shaivism things we have in India, because it's like a Vedanta, but it not give you that solitude. It said you are everything. This is everything. If you see one, you see everything in it. So that was a beautiful part of Kashmir Shaivism, which I feel is so simple basically, that it's all one. Whether divinity is something you see every day, in blooming of a flower, in your own digestion that you don't have control on it, your own elements. So this is a very important factor to understand. This energy, the Agni, the Prithvi, the Vayu, the Akash, this is energy. This is not something sitting in one place like axles of a wheel. So this wheel we were always aware of. And that is a simplified everything, whatever is there, whether it is feminine Shakti or Shiva Shakti. The Shaivism has really, it's a very simple thing if you explain it simple way. When I asked Mr. Ganju, who is Lakshmanju, I said, what are you doing? Why Shaivism? When I was a student, he said, it's nothing. I said, can you explain a little bit more? No, it's nothing. So I got very frustrated with him. What is this nothing? So when I came to Michigan State University, one Paul Miller Ortega was I don't know if you have heard it, he was a professor of Shaivism at Michigan State University and also was Swami Lakshman Jew. So I attended his class and he explained it so beautifully, so beautifully. And he said it's the simplest Vedanta actually, which does not exclude you anything, but it is one divinity. That's all. Whether you call Shiva, Shakti, or both, it's one of the most beautiful and very calculated, very mathematically calculated. Then he showed some of the things that are such a beautiful. And I felt it was a very simple way of not people leaving their houses, leaving their things. They accept the thing properly, nicely, and becomes part of your life. But you have to understand what the Shakti is. You have to really understand what it means,
Yeah,
scientifically kind of analyze what is Shiva Shakti. Then,
yeah,
then you accept it and you are happy. You are not unhappy with this conclusion.
yeah. So again, in the interest of
So,
time, Nirmal ji,
further,
very
Adi
quickly,
Shankara. Adi Shankara,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
So, Nirmal ji, in the interest of time, Shama ji talked about our very intimate relationship with Mother Goddess. What is your take on this inner journey? What does that mean to you? What strikes you as unique? Very quickly, so we can discover the last two topics.
Asking me, I
No,
think inner journal.
I'm asking Nimalji. Nimalji, moving on. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, this is a little bit of a complicated question, and I don't want to discuss it in a one-liner thing. I think all of us realize in our life that after the senses, there is something more to it in life. And sometimes you want to say, why do I have to look for it? What is the point? But a lot of very wise people all over the world are telling that there is something that you have to search for, you have to look for. Every place, where you go to old Greek thinking, uh, read Plato or read Plotinus and Neoplatonism. There is something beyond just our, and one has to look for that divinity that you see in yourself and others and realize that. And that conscious realizing, I'm making it very simple. Realizing that should be the goal of people, goal of what I have been told by some people who seem to have achieved Jivan Mukti, those kind of people, that it is real, this pursuit, and it is achievable, and one should do it. That's what.
That's very inspiring. Nimalji, I'm only going to give you the opportunity to talk about another extraordinary body of language that Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri people pioneered, and that's the whole area of health, starting with Charaka, the whole focus of medicine. To this day, medicine, is been something that Kashmiri Pandits have excelled as a noble profession. Do you want to just talk about that whole journey?
Right. The health is very important. It's like a divine pursuit one should have. If you are healthy, you can achieve other things. If you're not healthy, and health means everything. It means physical health, mental health. It means everything. And the Indians, and to some extent Greeks, very similar time, changed from, like in Vedas, there is Vedic medicine, which was sometimes, there's a devil in you, or you did something wrong, that's why you're getting this thing. Both of them changed towards that there is a reason for these diseases. and developed a system of finding the cause, finding the symptoms, thinking how can we take care of these diseases. And we have two giants actually sitting. One is Susruta and one is Charaka. Susruta, mythologically, says when the ocean was being churned, along with Lakshmi and Kalpavriksha and Kamadhenu, cow, and the Dhanvantri came out at the end, holding nectar in his hand, in a vase. And he came out and then he taught Susruta. He was the physician to the god and he taught Susruta. And from Susruta, then he wrote Susruta Samhita. This is about 1000 before the current era. And it's mind-boggling. Susruta's writing. I'm going to come to Charaka because he described about 120 instruments, classified the diseases, described 1,120 diseases. Then Charaka is the other one. Susruta was was a surgeon. He did cataract operations, he did rhinoplasty, he did plastic surgery, he did bladder stone removal, he did cesarean section. Describes them. It's the same technique we are still using. It doesn't change.
Wow.
But Charaka was more contemplative, he was from Kashmir. What the story goes is that there was God Daksha Prajapati, he taught it to Ashwin twins. And those twins talked to Indra. Then Indra talked to Bhardavaja. And Bhardavaja's student was Atreya. Atreya's student was one Vain, Agnivesha, but there also looks like Charaka. So few of his students wrote another book, which is known as Veda Samhita. And Charaka book is Charaka Samhita. But Veda Samhita was recently, maybe I think 200 years back, they found it. They didn't have it. And then there is the one Charaka Samhita that I have is actually Dribala, was another Kashmiri. His recension of Charaka Samhita. And then there was one Jajata who wrote a commentary on Charaka Samhita. It's very interesting. I had to write a small note. Somebody had asked me long back, one of these AI journals about Charaka. So what I wrote that time was the Charaka Samhita, a compendium of medicine in 1st century AD that is still being used in India. It describes various diseases and attempted a systematic classification which incorporated etiology, nosology, prognosis, and method of prevention. So it was a scientific way of going after diseases, not the way it was in other places, most of the other places. Very scientifically. He had a garden which had about 1,500 different plants, medicinal plants. And he was the first one, I think, on this planet, which he's getting credit for now, to say that the mental problems has an etiology. Means there's a way to figure out these mental problems and you can go after them. So that is phenomenal. But at the same time, I remember in Charaka Samhita, he talks about how people, it's not just knowledge, it is also how you use that knowledge. So he said, otherwise the doctor, the chikitsak is like a donkey who has a ton of gold bricks on his back. He feels the weight, but he doesn't know what to do with it, what it is. So the experience and how you do things is also very important. And he very similar to Susruta, Charaka also wrote how you should take care of your patient, your students, your family, exactly similar to Hippocratic Oath. Hippocrates was in about 6 BC. So I have a feeling these Greeks took from susruta, this oath, and 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 that we call as Hippocratic oath. But also when, after you see the Dorian wars, when destroyed Crete, the Greeks, eventually the genius moved toward this Asia Minor area where they developed most of their philosophical systems and medicine. Hippocrates was from there also. It was very close to India. And back and forth Indians were going there. So there was, I think, some give and take between Greeks and Indians. But Charaka Samhita is even used now. People still teach it. And
Marvelous.
the contribution means we should raise a flag for that, because it's something very tangible. You can feel it. It's not a philosophical thing. You cure people with this, what he talked about even now.
That's amazing. I'm just going to address, and then I'll ask each one of the panelists to take a minute and summarize what to them was the essence and uniqueness of our way of life. But what I want to talk about is something that doesn't really get covered, and that is the what I call Kashmiri Pandits as Shastra warriors. Uh, many of us in Kashmir uh, come from this place called Ranawari. And I was very struck by, I think it was Jona Raja, who talks about how the Khasas came and tried to invade Ranawari with the intention of wanting to loot and plunder. And he writes that all the citizens gathered and assailed them with a hail of stones from their slings. So we are the original David versus the Goliath. Everybody knows about the Shahi kings and people know about Emperor Lalitaditya, but they don't know that Pandit Hridaynath Kunzru, a very prominent Kashmiri Pandit during the freedom movement, that his ancestor was Miru Pandit Dhar, who was the commander of the Royal Mounted Guard for Empress Nur Jahan. And people will get a lot of pride that uh, when the British Indian Army was initiated, that Kashmiri Pandits were on the forefront. They served in Burma. They laid down their life in Burma. People like Hemnath Kak, who joined the very first Indian squadron in Burma. People like Captain Motilal Khatju, who died in the Burma campaign. There were Kashmiri Pandits who laid down their lives in World War One. You have Major Pandit Pyare Lal Atal. You have Flying Officer Iqbal Narayan Shivpuri. I mean, these are all very incredible warriors, and it goes back to our history. I think it would make people smile that many people know about the Shaolin monastery where the martial arts have now become world famous. But the teacher of Shaolin martial arts was Buddha Bhadra, who I think may have come from Nepal, but he came to Kashmir. He resided in Kashmir, and then he traveled to China. And there was this point that Subhash and Nirmal and I think Shama you have made also is that this notion of a full life where there is no either or choice is illustrated by Alamkara. Alamkara was a great poet, and in fact, he gave his name to a form of poetry, Alamkara ornamentation. But people don't realize he was an absolutely fierce warrior. And Kalanda, when he writes about his ability to fight with a sword and with a bow and arrow, I mean, this man was one lethal warrior. So I tell people, and this may surprise everybody, that on a per capita basis, Kashmiri Pandits probably rank number one as a martial race, even to this day when you see how many people we send into the Indian Armed Forces. So let me stop there and ask you to sort of take a minute to summarize what you think for you as a Kashmiri Pandit represents the uniqueness of the choices our culture made? Shamaji, why don't we start with you?
Okay, very interesting. Everybody thinks the Kashmiris were not in the fighting force, but they have been. And somebody told me in Kerala, Kashmiri Pandits and the Namboodiris, by, because they were such small numbers, you know, who could, there are farmers, there are all kinds of people. Kashmiri Pandits were not the only Kashmiris, all other Kashmiris. But they were amazing. Their strategy was so good, they could run the whole war by themselves with few soldiers. And they were dedicated. Whatever they did, they were dedicated. So Namboodiris and Kashmiri Pandits both fought. And there were what is called, I heard about, there are different spots in Kashmir Valley fringes where there will be soldiers. There were forts, small forts. That there was a name for these soldiers. I don't remember now. And they used to be there guarding, and they were absolutely best dedicated guards. So it's not that they were not there, and they had to fight. They were surrounded in borders. They had so many countries around them. Some were fierce fighters. They had to take care of themselves. So it's not that they never fought. There was a contingent that fought. And when you take Laltaditya, he fought all the way through India. There were some outside, there were non-Kashmiris, but a lot of Kashmiris who got hold of forces. Amazing warrior. And he went all the way to the Kaveri Basin and to other West, what do you call, Middle Eastern countries.
Yeah, he
So
sure did.
it's not that element.
Yeah. Subhashi, your quick summary of what this way of life meant to you?
Oh, absolutely. Well-rounded people. They were traders. They did all kinds of stuff. They were soldiers. My own family, the Kaks, there are lots of soldiers, and you already mentioned many others who took part in the First World War, Second World War, and later on. So I think it's a time to celebrate all this past history and use the memory of this past to dedicate ourselves to an equally glorious future. And it's been a wonderful thing to participate in this panel. Thank you, Rakesh ji and Nirmal ji and Shama ji.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nirmalji, your take?
Yes, I just want to add that for a small community to produce a chief of army, a chief of navy, chief of air force of India is unbelievable. You know, it's a myth that Brahmins didn't fight. If you go back to the big dynasties, even the first king, Ben Qasim fought Dar, the Brahmin. But if you go to Rashtrakutas and Pallavas and lot of Marathas, lot of their kings and this dynasty are Brahmin dynasties. I had made a list one day about more than 60% were Brahmins. So Brahmins have that element of fighting. What happens is when you become too intellectual, and this is what Theodore Roosevelt said long back. He said, keep your ink wet, but keep your powder dry. You write philosophy with your ink and everything, but if your powder is not dry, this won't survive too long. And I think we missed that. And we also, during that period of Islamic incursions in Kashmir, lost ourselves. If you look at Didda, I don't show it to anyone, but look at Didda, killed all her sons, grandsons, makes what Sangram Raja as king, started Lohara dynasty. We had gone down ourselves. No society gets destroyed by outsiders. Rome got destroyed by Caligulas and Neros and everything. This is how each society destroys itself eventually at the end. You don't have to have outside attackers. And I think at the end, we around that period lost what we were. We still had very bright people around, but I think we became little crazy type of life.
Can
I,
I say one thing,
uh,
Rakesh ji?
Yes. Yes, go ahead
I was
quickly.
reading Ira Pandey's, yeah, quickly. Ira Pandey's other day, she said, I never knew Kashmiri Pandits had to contribute so much. Who said Kashmir is just a piece of land? It is the flow of divinity, anything, everything. And other thing, and these are the people who resist disappearance. I thought that was a very good sentence. They have been resisting disappearance even now. And
Well
I
said.
think that is something must be there, that we don't disappear. We are here, even
Well,
here now.
well said. So I'll say my
Thank you.
piece. Thank you. That was well said. Thank you. Nirmal. I'll say my piece as to what it means to me and what I hope the takeaway, especially the next generation, will take. To me, being born a Kashmiri Pandit is to be born with one birthright, and that is you have the opportunity to be all you can be in your life. And you're born with a memory that we have faced situations, as Nirmalji pointed out, where we have lost it all. But you're also born with the learning that Deva Swami gives Kotarani, that what you can lose is finite, but what you can create is infinite. And that's what our culture did. Our culture equipped us in any situation to have portable skills where we could go and create infinity. And we have displayed that with our choices, that we are truth seekers, that we are beauty seekers, that we are consciousness seekers. And this truth seeking, beauty seeking, and consciousness seeking has enabled us to rebound a community that in 30 years has gone from genocide to now at the very top in every sphere, in every geography, is a testament to our way of life. And it is through understanding our history that we are now going to build a magnificent future. I thank you, Shamaji. I thank you, Padmaji, Subhash Kakji, and I thank you, Nirmalji, for all that you have done for our community, your inspirations. And I know that our global community and others, as they go through this festival, pick the subjects that are of interest to you, you will find that you'll be filled with wonder, you'll be filled with joy of this magnificent place called Kashmir and its
Thank
people
you.
who today are upholding its life, the Kashmiri Pandit. Thank you.